All right, everyone, buckle up, because we are diving into 14th century Okinawa today.
Ooh, exciting.
It's a century, honestly, packed with ambitious leaders, crumbling castles, whispers of rebellion. It's giving Game of Thrones.
I was gonna say.
But on an island paradise.
Yeah, and you know how much I love a good power struggle.
Oh, absolutely.
But what's so fascinating about this period in Okinawan history is that it's not just ancient history, right?
Right.
The divisions that popped up during this time, they didn't just fade away. They really left this mark on the island's identity, and we can still see echoes of it even today.
Okay, I am so ready. Give me the rundown. Where does our deep dive begin?
Well, Kerr, in Okinawa, the history of an island people, he drops us right into the action.
Okay.
Right after the death of Okinawa's top leader, the paramount chief.
Okay.
Now, that term might sound a little,
A little formal.
yeah, a little archaic, but it's super important for understanding the power structure back then.
Gotcha.
Think of the paramount chief as like the ultimate authority, the one calling the shots for the entire island.
Makes sense.
So naturally, when this leader dies, it creates a massive power vacuum.
Right, like pulling the top block out of a Jenga tower.
Exactly.
Things are going to get wobbly.
Everything's going to collapse.
Yeah. So, who tries to fill that void?
Well, first up, you've got young Tamagusuku,
Okay.
the heir to the throne at Yureso.
Okay.
Problem is, he's only 19.
Oh, wow.
And inheriting the title doesn't automatically make you fit to rule, right?
Right.
According to Kerr, Tamagusuku really struggled to gain the respect of his court.
19 and suddenly expected to rule a kingdom.
Yeah.
Talk about being thrown into the deep end.
Oh, totally.
That's a lot of pressure for someone so young.
Huge learning curve.
Yeah, no wonder he struggled.
Exactly. And to make matters even worse, he didn't exactly have a great team backing him up.
Oh.
So things kind of spiral pretty quickly.
Oh.
And before you know it, rebellion is brewing.
Okay, so we've got a young, inexperienced leader facing a full-blown rebellion.
Yep.
That sounds like the perfect recipe for disaster.
It's a recipe for disaster.
This is where the Game of Thrones element really kicks in, doesn't it?
You got it.
Okay.
Two powerful lords see this as their opportunity to grab some power for themselves.
Cool.
In the south, we have the Lord of Azato.
Okay.
He's a shrewd leader, and he decides, you know what? I'm going to establish my own kingdom. Nanzan.
So instead of trying to control everything, he goes for a divide and conquer strategy.
Yeah, he sees an opportunity.
Very clever. Tell me more about Nanzan. What was it like?
Well, Ozato, the Lord of Ozato's base, was this bustling port city.
Okay.
Picture this. Ships laden with all these exotic goods, merchants haggling in marketplaces, the air thick with the scent of spices
I love it.
from far-off lands.
Okay, I can picture it. Ozato sounds like the place to be vibrant, cosmopolitan,
Cosmopolitan,
a
exactly.
melting pot of cultures. But what about the north? Who's running the show up there?
That's where we meet the Lord of Nakijin,
Okay.
a leader as tough and unyielding as the terrain he controlled. He carves out his own kingdom, Hokuzan, in the rugged mountainous region of the Motobu Peninsula.
So complete contrast to that bustling port city vibe of Ozato.
Totally different vibe.
What was life like in Hokuzan? Was it all about survival of the fittest?
You could say that. Kerr paints this picture of Hokuzan as a much harsher environment
Okay.
compared to the central and southern parts of the island.
Right.
Even the architecture reflects this difference.
Oh, really?
Yeah. Like when we think of kingdoms, we often imagine these grand, elaborate castles.
Right, with big towers and...
Exactly. But Nakijin Castle was a different story.
Okay.
Built with rough-hewn stone, it just lacked that refined elegance of castles in other parts of Okinawa, like those in Chuzan.
So while the South is thriving on trade and this very cosmopolitan energy, the North is all about resilience.
Resilience.
And rugged individualism.
Absolutely.
That's a pretty stark contrast.
Yeah, it is.
Did these differences lead to, let's say, cultural clashes?
Oh, absolutely. In
Certainly.
fact, even to this day. There are remnants of this north-south divide in Okinawa.
Oh,
For example, central Okinawans used and sometimes still use the term jambara to refer to northerners.
jambara. What does that mean? Is it like a friendly rivalry? Or something a bit more pointed?
Well, it's definitely got some bite to it.
Okay.
You could think of it as the Okinawan equivalent of calling someone a hillbilly or a bumpkin.
Oh.
It suggests, well, let's just say a not-so-sophisticated view of the North held by those in the central regions.
Hmm.
And there's a reason it goes beyond just a casual insult.
Oh, this is getting interesting. Tell me more about this jambara business.
Yeah, there's this theory that northern Okinawans might actually have a different origin story than those in the central and southern regions.
Okay.
They might have arrived on the island separately, which could explain some of those cultural and linguistic differences.
Fascinating.
Yeah. So jambara becomes more than just a jab, you know?
Right.
It hints at this deeper historical and cultural divide that existed.
Wow, that's really interesting. It's like this word, jambara, unlocks this whole hidden layer of Okinawan history.
Right.
It really makes you wonder what other, cultural quirks or differences might be kind of lurking beneath the surface.
Exactly. Yeah.
But before we get too off track, let's bring it back to our main players.
Okay.
We've got Chuzan, weakened but still holding on to tradition.
Right.
We've got Nanzan in the south, embracing that cosmopolitan vibe.
Yeah.
And Hokuzan in the north, tough as nails and potentially from a different lineage altogether.
Potentially.
With the island fragmented like this, I imagine things got pretty tense.
Oh, absolutely.
Right.
Think about it.
Yeah.
3 ambitious leaders, each with their own vision, vying for control over resources, trade routes,
Right.
and of course, legitimacy.
Because being a king or a lord isn't much good if nobody recognizes your authority.
Exactly.
What did this game of legitimacy look like in 14th century Okinawa?
Hey, so this is where things get really interesting. Because back then, gaining favor with the Chinese Empire, it wasn't just about boosting your ego.
Right.
It was a strategic power move.
Okay.
Being in the good graces of the Chinese emperor, it meant access to valuable trade rights, luxury goods,
Okay.
and, even military support if things got dicey.
So it's like being part of the most exclusive club in Asia.
Exactly.
Getting that Chinese seal of approval, that was the golden ticket to power and prosperity.
It really was.
Wow.
And this scramble for Chinese recognition, it added this whole other layer of complexity to the rivalry
Right.
between Chuzan, Nanzan, and Hokuzan. They weren't just competing with each other anymore, right? They were trying to outshine each other on an international stage.
Okay, yeah, I can see how that would intensify things.
Oh, yeah.
Imagine, like, sending envoys laden with gifts,
Oh, totally.
just hoping to, like, impress the Chinese court more than your rivals.
It's like a high-stakes diplomatic dance-off.
Yes, I love that.
Right.
It really highlights how interconnected the world was even back then.
Absolutely.
These weren't isolated kingdoms, just squabbling over scraps.
Wow.
They were active players on this really complex geopolitical landscape.
100%. Yeah.
Wow, this is really giving me a whole new perspective on Okinawan history.
Yeah.
It's not just about what was happening on the island. It's about understanding Okinawa's place in this, like, much larger web of power and influence.
Exactly. Yeah.
So with all of this competition and maneuvering, what was the ultimate impact of this era? Did these divisions just kind of fade away over time, or did they leave a lasting mark on Okinawan identity?
That's the million-dollar question, isn't it? It's like trying to trace the branches of a tree back to their original roots,
Right.
It's complicated, but we can see some clear legacies of this period woven into Okinawan culture today.
So how did these power struggles and cultural differences we talked about, how they actually play out in the long run?
Well, it's really interesting,
Yeah.
like those divisions were seeds that grew into these distinct cultural branches.
Mhm.
Like take the whole jambara distinction.
Right.
It might not be meant literally anymore,
Right.
but it still carries weight,
Yeah.
It shows how those old divisions still color people's perceptions,
Interesting.
even subconsciously, about different parts of the island.
Wow, that's amazing. It's like a subtle cultural inheritance
Yeah.
passed down through generations.
Definitely.
What else did this era influence? Did it affect anything beyond just, like, language?
Oh, yeah, for sure. The thing about art, for example.
Okay.
Each kingdom developed its own unique artistic styles,
Mm.
reflecting their environment, their resources, even their values,
Right.
You can see it in their pottery, textiles,
Oh, wow.
even the design motifs in their architecture.
Uh-huh.
These weren't just political entities, right?
Right.
They were crucibles of cultural expression.
So even though the kingdoms themselves eventually faded,
Right.
their artistic legacy, they lived on.
They did. Yeah.
It makes you wonder what else might have been different. If Okinawa hadn't gone through this whole fragmentation thing,
Yeah.
would it have developed a more, like, homogenous culture?
Mm.
Or were those regional differences always going to emerge one way or another.
That's the beauty of history, isn't it?
Yeah?
We can speculate all we want,
Right.
but we can never truly know what might have been.
True, true.
But what we can learn from Okinawa's story is that the past, it never really leaves us, does it? It echoes through time, shaping our present.
It's like that William Faulkner quote, "The past isn't dead. It isn't even past."
Exactly.
So before we wrap up our deep dive into the Three Kingdoms period, any final thoughts to leave our listeners pondering?
You know, I think it'd be really interesting for everyone listening to just take a moment and think.
Okay.
If you were transported back to 14th century Okinawa,
Okay.
which of these kingdoms would you pledge your allegiance to? Based on everything we talked about today, would it be the bustling trade hub of Nenzan, the historically significant Shuzan, or the rugged and isolated Hokuzan?
That is a tough one. It's like choosing between a beach vacation, a historical pilgrimage, and a rugged mountain adventure all at the same time.
Right.
Each one offers a totally different experience, just like the kingdoms that we've explored today.
Exactly.
A huge thank you to our expert guide for leading us on this incredible journey through time.
My pleasure.
And to our listeners, we hope you've enjoyed this deep dive into Okinawan history. Who knows what other fascinating nuggets of knowledge are out there, just waiting for us to uncover them in our next episode. Until then, keep exploring.